Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know that a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and important conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Nikki, the Executive Director, and Jenny Gosheth, the Staff Attorney for Fort Wayne Metropolitan Human Relations Commission, otherwise known as Metro. So before we dive deep into your work at Metro and also about your backgrounds, I think we should start with understanding what exactly is the Metropolitan Human Relations Commission and what you are charged to do as a commission.
Yeah, so our name is a mouthful, and that's why most people know us as Fort Wayne Metro or Metro. We are the local civil rights agency here in Fort Wayne, and we enforce civil rights laws here in the city. We also educate the public on diversity and discrimination issues. And so when we say enforce, that means we investigate discrimination complaints. So if someone felt they were discriminated against, they could file a charge with us.
And when you talk about the ordinances, those are the laws, right? And so not only do you need to look at if somebody did something wrong, but also then if they broke a law, correct? I mean, a civil rights ordinance, is that correct?
Yes.
And then how does that play out, though, if there's a conflict between the city ordinances versus the state law versus what federal laws are? Where's your jurisdiction there, and how do you remedy those situations?
Well, we are created under our local Fort Wayne ordinance, so we have the ability to enforce that. And then there are federal, like for instance in housing, the Federal Fair Housing Act. For employment in the federal realm, there's Title VII,
Equal opportunity,
the ADA,
right?
Yeah, correct. The ADEA for age. So our local ordinance kind of mirrors those federal laws, and that enables us to have federal partnerships with those agencies so we can enforce the federal laws at the same time as the local ordinance.
Yeah,
Right.
so we have federal contracts with HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and the EOC, what you mentioned, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
And so, and also some of your funding comes from those, is that correct?
Yep.
Right. Okay. And so your idea is that you're really looking for discrimination in the areas of employment, housing, education, public accommodation, which would be for individuals with disabilities.
Well,
Correct.
public accommodation would be if someone felt they were treated differently while seeking out services. So
Okay.
going to a restaurant.
Or so then that could cover somebody who's in the LGBTQ community, right?
Yeah,
As well.
absolutely. Yeah.
And then and it's based on race, color, sex, age, national origin, religion, and ancestry, pregnancy, place of birth, sexual orientation, and for only for housing, familial status.
Legal status.
Correct.
So you have a lot to cover because
Yeah, those are all the protected bases that are protected under the federal law
Right.
and our local ordinance.
And so before we really talk about what Metro does, I wanted to talk a little bit about your background. So Nikki, you're third generation Fort
Third
Wayne?
generation on one side, fourth generation
Okay.
on one side. So yeah, I'm a Fort Wayne native.
And you were actually in Jenny's position before you became the executive director in 2017, correct?
Yes.
So now, are most of the people who work with you attorneys?
No. So right now we have 12 employees, and 8 of those are investigators. And so I will say two of our investigators did go to law school, but you don't have to be an attorney. The only attorneys in the office are myself, Jenny, and then one investigator.
Okay.
And then another one recently passed the bar.
Now, and you did spend a short time in the private sector as a lawyer.
Yeah.
So, the first question when anybody becomes a lawyer is, why did you decide that you wanted to work in the public realm?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be an attorney. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it exactly. I knew I wanted to help people. That was always the overarching theme. I want to help people. I started out wanting to be a business attorney, and my graduate degree is in business administration. I'm at St. Francis. And then when I went to law school, I took business law classes, and I realized no, that's not what I want to do. I ended up taking employment discrimination while I was there, and I was like, wow, I was really passionate about what I was learning, and I knew that's the field I wanted to go into.
I knew, unlike Nikki, I did not grow up thinking that I would be an attorney. So when I went off to school, I realized pretty quickly that I wanted to do something in this area, in civil rights in general, but wasn't quite sure how to place that. And actually just through classes in college and some of my professors realized that a legal field might be the best fit. So I changed my direction, went to law school. Similar with Nikki, took employment discrimination courses, and realized like I don't want to be a business attorney.
Yeah.
And when I graduated in 2005, the timing was right that there was a staff attorney position open at Metro, and a local civil rights agency that was the perfect fit. So just worked out.
So let's talk about what exactly does Metro do. So talk to me about, so we've identified the areas any areas of civil rights that you can be discriminated on. Mm-hmm. So, and you talk about this Metro process. Mm-hmm. So explain to me what that is in the context of what you do.
Yeah, so like you said, we take complaints in 4 different areas: employment, housing, public accommodation, and schooling or education. About 75% of the charges that we get are in the employment arena, and about 20% are in the housing arena, and then the rest, it falls into public accommodation or schooling. So if someone feels they've been discriminated against, then they would be able to come to our office, mm-hmm. and they can either call us, they can walk into our office, or even go online and fill out a form. And they would sit with an investigator, and the investigator would talk them through like what's going on, why
mm-hmm.
Why do you believe you've been discriminated
mm-hmm.
against? And then we would determine if we have jurisdiction to take that particular charge. And so jurisdiction is just a legal term to say, are we able to investigate this case? Mm-hmm. And so we determine did it happen within the city of Fort Wayne? How many employees does the employer have if it's an employment
mm-hmm.
case?
Right.
How long ago did it happen,
right?
Because if it happened over a year ago, it would be time barred. You can't file a charge now. And so we determine those things. And we also determine, do they believe that the harm that happened to them, or they were terminated, or they weren't given that promotion, was it based on their protected class? So was mm-hmm. it based on their race, or was
mm-hmm.
it based on their sex? Sometimes they don't believe it was a discrimination issue. They might say, well, I just really thought it was unfair. They just don't like me.
Right.
Well, that is not a case that we can't take
right.
if they don't believe it's based
because
on
you have to, because it has to be unlawful discrimination, right?
Correct.
I mean, because sometimes they'll do it in such a way that it may be wrong, but it's not breaking the law. Or the other thing that I thought that you also look to enforce is unfounded allegations of discrimination. So if someone wants to accuse an organization or something of that they were discriminated on, because some people make claims like why they were fired, and then do you look into those as well?
Well, no. So if someone files a charge and they have jurisdiction, we investigate that particular charge, and then we uncover evidence that we present to our commissioners. And then the commissioners determine, is this a probable cause or no probable cause case? So is there any evidence to support what they're saying?
Okay, but I think where I sometimes feel like there's some resistance and tension is between, you've got the hard facts of the law, but then you also have the subtleties of nuances in conversation, or somebody feels that something happened to them, mm-hmm. and also that it can become more of a he said, she said, because maybe there wasn't someone else in the room. Or so how do you balance that to sort of look at the soft side of mm-hmm. where it's not fact based. I mean, ultimately you're looking for the facts, but against how you evaluate should that be investigated or not, because does it look like it's
mm-hmm.
Affecting the law?
Well, in the beginning, just filing a complaint to be investigated, oftentimes people don't have evidence with them, right? It's based on this belief. Maybe it's based on a conversation that they had, and they have this feeling that, I feel like I was treated differently because mm-hmm. of whatever protected class. So as long as what they're alleging falls, I'm trying to how to describe this, is a claim that we can investigate, mm-hmm. we will look into it. In some cases do come down to a he said, she said. We look at credibility issues and things like that. But during our investigations, we can request documents, we interview witnesses that, that particular person who's coming in doesn't have access to, right? Like they don't have that information, they just have this belief.
Right.
So during our investigation, we're able to gather, documentation. Sometimes it's, paperwork, videos, recordings. We interview witnesses under oath. And then,
So it could be other testimony.
yeah,
from
other
employees.
testimony.
But so does it mean, if someone files a claim, you will investigate? Like you don't determine the validity of the claim at the time of filing, is that correct?
When I was talking about jurisdiction, we have to have jurisdiction to take the charge.
Okay.
So as long as we have jurisdiction to take the charge, we can take that
So
if they
that
want to
means
file.
so that means if it's within the city of Fort Wayne, or
So, yeah,
time issues or things like that,
yeah,
right?
so as long as we can take the charge, they have the opportunity to file. Now it's up to them if they want to file.
So in terms of, because you had 354 drafted complaints in the area of unemployment. So what I'm curious about is, are there certain patterns in the types of complaints or the category of complaint that you are seeing that may be more indicative of issues, general issues in Fort Wayne? I'm curious to see if you can speak to that at all.
we do see a lot of harassment claims, and that could be based on any protected class: sexual harassment, racial harassment, national origin. So if someone's being harassed and, and that could be comments, conduct towards them, maybe someone's being picked on based on their accent. So we see that. And then also in combination with harassment, we often see it paired with a retaliation claim. So if someone feels like they're being harassed, and they come forward, report that, and that can be internally or with an agency like us. If something happens to them afterwards, if the employer then terminates them or takes some action against them, that will sometimes trigger a retaliation claim. So we see those paired together. And then of course with disability issues, we see a lot of reasonable accommodation claims. So if someone has a disability and they need an accommodation to work, they want to be coming to work and doing their job.
Right.
They just need something as an accommodation. So we see a lot of claims based on reasonable accommodations as well.
And do you do any, like, based on your analysis of the cases that you get, like, do you then do any report back at the end I know you do the summation of how many you've had, but do you look back and then report to the commission, like, we definitely saw, these number of cases that were harassment or sexual harassment. These were the number of cases against pregnant women, and just to sort of draw attention, like I said, to some of these themes, because the reality of it is that the majority of companies in Fort Wayne, as in the world, are traditionally run by white middle-aged men, and sometimes I think it also trickles down from the top. And so some of the things that they may not think are, harassment or inappropriate or, maybe. So just in terms of also your big push now for education and advocacy, that from that standpoint, I'm just wondering if you see anything or any of those kinds of issues.
Well, like in regards to what we tell our commissioners, and what we report on in our annual report, we make sure to break it down by bases. So, we know the numbers on race, sex,
right,
and all those issues. And then internally, we do keep track of like the harassment issues that we're seeing, and we do make sure our education outreach reflects like, hey, these are kind of the hot topics. This is the training that we would like to do. So we've had employers ask for anti-harassment training, right, to address some of those the conduct or comments that may be happening there at their facility, or it would be a sexual harassment training. Or it could be workplace civility training, right?
And are they, are employers required, I know they have to do like the tornado, drills and things like that, but are they required to do training both for their management and their staff, or is this based on their own decisions?
Yeah, and there's no law that says a company has to do this type of training. We just like to be a resource for employers, and so our training is completely free. And so the last couple years, minus this year with the
Right.
pandemic, we've been out there quite a bit, going out and offering this free training and doing the training, and a lot of employers and housing providers are taking advantage of that. And we've been able to create a lot of good relationships within the community and collaborations with organizations for that.
And obviously, you know, we're going to take that out of the equation, but clearly with the whole polarization of the country, and obviously the incredible issues facing racism and, you know, even political parties and nobody being able to really come together in a civil way. Have you seen a significant number of both claims or outreach from managers or companies that really want more training, or are you finding either or has been really impacted in your work?
Yeah, I would say, I think with everything going on, employers really want to make sure that they're being proactive and that they are making their place a safe environment. And so I do believe that employers are seeking more training. And I know the city currently has the United Front training, and they're offering that to, I believe, hundreds of employers here in the community.
But they have to pay for it.
Do they have to pay?
Well, there is scholarships, but
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what the
but you are a
cost would be.
supporter of that because it does empower them to understand, to assess their their environments.
biases.
But that's biases. I mean, bias is perception. I mean, that's not law. I mean,
Well, I believe their training goes over biases as well as, you know, the importance of diversity and inclusion and microaggressions. And I think that all comes into play when we talk about harassment issues.
Okay.
So sometimes when someone doesn't understand that a certain joke or comment is inappropriate, and they say it and they keep saying it and they're doing it daily or weekly or monthly, that can turn into a harassment issue and harassment claim. And so that's why we really believe those types of trainings and becoming aware of what your biases might be are so important to stop and be proactive, stop that harassment from happening.
right. Or, I mean, but there is a difference between harassment and sort of being uncomfortable. Like,
Yes, civility.
you know,
We always say
right.
the difference between civility and what's illegal harassment.
Right.
There is a difference, and the biggest thing we always say on that spectrum is you want to stop it when it's uncivil, right? Because then if it goes to uncivil or disrespectful, then that's where it escalates into
Right.
where it could become illegal.
And so also you spend a lot of time, and I attended, you did your Fair Housing Summit, the
Oh, yeah,
program.
yep.
So let's talk a little bit about the issues with fair housing and this whole idea of this is really in some parts where you're seeing institutionalized racism. So how do you combat that in your work and focus on fair housing issues?
Yeah, for us, number one, it's always enforcement is the backbone of what we do. So that's making sure we're investigating those charges thoroughly, making sure that we are doing what we need to on that side from the enforcement piece, so individuals are able to come into our office and we process those charges, like we said, through that Metro process. And then the second piece to that is that education and outreach and making sure we're going out into the public and talking about what are fair housing rights and what does that look like, and doing that also that training with housing providers. And so we do training with the apartment association, Upstart realtors, when individuals get their license to kind of learn about that.
And are realtors required, because they have to do continuing education credits, are they required to take those kinds of classes?
I believe they are required. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe they are required to do a fair housing class.
I know that you look at the city ordinances, but let's take a look at, so in 2020, Trump passed basically an easing of the fair housing law that was really based on exclusionary zoning issues. And really it said that you just have to show that you have made the intent to provide safe and decent housing to, and also that they weren't, the federal government was not enforcing fair housing issues. They don't really go after them and prosecute them. So it sort of made it your work had less teeth in a sense. Has that impacted your work at all, or no?
So we enforce the Fair Housing Act, and that's federal law, and so we've been enforcing that regardless
but
of
this was a change to the fair housing law. So
Are you talking about the disparate impact?
This was when he talked about the barriers to fair housing choices. It was, yes, the barriers.
Disparate impact rule that recently changed.
Yes.
Jen, if you want to, I know
So does that conflict with, because the city didn't change their ordinances with it. So that's what I'm saying. Where does it come from, that federal versus city law? Because ultimately, does federal trump city? No.
Well, the law itself stayed the same, but what they can do is change some of their rules, which are our ordinance doesn't mirror all of the federal code. So it's really like on an interpretation side, and we haven't seen any complaints regarding zoning issues recently, so it hasn't affected any of our enforcement.
What do you see? I mean, are the biggest fair housing issues more accommodations like for special needs, or is that what you see more, or is it, are there issues about, because everybody talks about institutionalized racism, right? And this inherent issues with housing. So I would think that we would see then a significant number of complaints that would reflect back to institutionalized racism as it relates to housing. So
I would say for us, the top is disability discrimination, but then race and national origin are like right after that.
And what do you see are the biggest issues that when it comes to, what are the types of complaints you get when it comes to race and country of origin?
For national origin complaints, that could be as simple as someone saying, hey, go back to your own, harassment issues. Comments saying go back to your own country, or you can't speak Spanish here. So that we've seen harassment issues with that.
But is that, okay, but this again, see, I think the challenge is that you have a really tough job, because someone just said that to you, although someone recorded it and put it up on social media, then you're going to be persecuted and prosecuted in the public realm. But if someone just said that to you, that's not technically harassment, right? Because harassment, it has to be ongoing, it has to be consistent, right?
Yeah, so be severe, what they call severe or pervasive.
Right. So, but with housing, then, what are those those real issues that you see in terms of race?
So outside of the harassment context?
Well, how do you determine if, it's harassment? Because one of the things I was looking at was, so I was looking at some of your, in the fair housing brochure that you do. And you were saying that some of the verbiage used in complaints that could be indicative of discrimination, to me, were very subtle and very difficult to prove. Because if someone said to you, the seller decided to take the house off the market, or I rented the apartment after you called, or you were told that the apartment was just rented. Well, in those cases, these all may be true. So how do you? I mean, that's not. So that's what my point is how do you determine when that is subtle, or that is truly breaking the fair house? That's what I'm trying to understand.
So for instance, the example, like saying, oh, this apartment, is no longer available.
Right.
And someone is, maybe they, that comment made them think, well, it looks available. I don't see anybody moved in. It looks empty, right? Something is making them think. So when they come in and that alleges a violation, it's falsely misrepresenting the availability of a unit. So if that's based on someone's race, for example, that would be a Fair Housing Act violation. So what we do as part of that process would be, in our investigation, gather evidence. Is there a lease that was signed, for example, during that time period? Was it actually still available?
Right.
And if it was still available, why would you tell someone? So that's kind of like what you're alluding to earlier, like piecing it together.
Right. But I'm also, because we are in a time where we were talking about that we are such in a heightened state of everybody is on edge about everything they say, the way they say it. So, how do you, so have you seen an increase in people coming in and saying, just because someone said that they rented it, they think that are you seeing more cases because we are in this heightened state of that anything anyone says to you is, could be taken or as a slight or harassment, or have you seen that, or not so much from your work?
I wouldn't say there's necessarily like a heightened number of charges coming in, because it's right now with the pandemic,
Okay.
that has made
Yeah.
things more difficult, and has created additional barriers that
Right.
keep people from coming in
Right.
from an access standpoint. But I would say it's steady.
Okay.
Like they're not going down.
So, okay,
Yeah.
so now you bring up my other point, this access issue. So I can download the complaint form online, right, from your website.
Yes.
Yes, but I cannot file it online.
Correct.
Why?
We don't have the system to do that.
Okay.
Generally, what we would do is we could either mail, like right now with the pandemic, what we've done to give people access is we've mailed them charges, or they can come in as
Okay,
well.
but the
through
reality
social,
of it
like
is,
safety
but-
standards.
But I'm going to push back there because you should be able to technologically be able to accept these, because aren't you then saying that, so if someone wants to file a complaint, they have to come in, right? That means that they have to assume they have the transportation to get to your office. They would have to take the time off from work.
Well, they don't have to
They
come
have to
in.
come in.
They can call, and then they can talk with an investigator. The investigator will walk them through that charge.
Right.
Then they would create the charge based on assuming
Right.
we have jurisdiction and all that.
Right, okay, we're
They would
assuming all of that.
Create the
Right.
create the paperwork. We would mail them the paperwork. We would even put another
Separate,
envelope,
okay, so
yeah,
you-
and then
okay.
they could mail it back. So they
Okay.
never have to come
So
in.
you do everything to ensure that there's no barrier.
Correct.
Because that also, because it, I sort of, it begged the question, because I can download the form online, and then also because you've been very effective with your social media, and you have the, this fairness campaign.
Yeah, we had the Faces of Fairness.
Faces of
campaign,
Fairness,
yeah.
and you had 90,000. So, and there is a lot of still city departments and things, and that they require you to do things that really are a barrier. And so like I had to get something notarized. I'm like, who has to get things notarized anymore? Because everybody does everything electronic. I mean, you can even do an electronic signature. And so a lot of times, or you have to file it in person, or
Yeah.
things like that. Like, I just think that to make sure that, especially for those who really are the ones who need your resources and services,
Yeah.
I just wanted to beg the question that you're not putting up those barriers to them because of the fact that they can't get off from work, or they don't have,
Yeah.
or even the fact that they don't have a computer. I mean, that's a whole nother issue, which we really saw, especially for students
Yeah.
during
Yeah.
the pandemic. So I just wanted to ask you that because
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we like I said, we mail them things they can mail back. We've also been known to go out if they have a disability and they're like, hey, I really can't come in and I'm having difficulty even getting this mailed off.
Right.
We'll go out to them. So we do try to make sure that we are accessible for everyone, and that also plays a part with our education outreach. We've gone in the past, we've done what we call intake on the road. We've also had an office space at the Urban League at one point, where we would also do intakes there. So we've kind of, depending on our education outreach for that particular year, we do think outside the box to try to make sure that we are making ourselves accessible for everyone.
So now, granted, COVID is an exception, but you're in your 4th year as the executive director.
Yes.
And you've obviously been with the organization for quite a while. So how are we doing? How are we doing in terms of the areas of fair and equitable housing and education and employment? Because, there is this big United Front organization that's been very huge with the tremendous support to help educate the community in our biases, and ultimately then that may impact our decisions that could lead to these areas. And it makes it seem that we're really not doing very well. I mean, like we have granted, you also have to take it into account what's on the national level versus local. So let's look at it on the local level. How are we doing? What have you seen changed? What hasn't changed? What do you think we could do better?
Yeah, so when we talk about discrimination in general, it happens everywhere, right? It happens in every city. Locally, I feel like we are going in the right direction because we have employers, we have city leaders who are looking into creating programs like United Front, right? So that people are educated. The mayor also created a commission on police reform and racial justice. And so I believe, we've seen, things that have happened, and we are trying to address those, and we're going in the right direction.
And what are the issues that you think we still need to work on?
I would say, I think the biggest thing is to continue to make sure that we are making people aware, like that awareness piece, so that we're getting out into the community. And even from an organizational standpoint with the agency, we've been around for over 50 years, right? And I think you pointed out like 70 years next year.
Yeah.
70.
And our biggest thing is we want people to know that we are here
Okay.
and that we're around. And so getting that message
Right,
out.
but ultimately, okay, so you've been around for 70 years, and we've been, granted there have been certain reenactments of the Fair Housing Law and Title IX and everything as we go along, yet we're here 70 years later, we've still got the same problems, the same issues, the same infringements on civil rights and liberties. So obviously we're not even, what is it that we're not doing or that people aren't getting?
So I definitely think there's been a lot of improvements over the
Okay.
last
Okay.
70
All right.
years.
Okay.
So there has been a lot
So
of
let's look
improvements.
at, but let's look at, I mean, you would think that in the last 5 years, in this country, that, and looking back at this institutional and systemic, and that people would really say that we have not made any improvements. So where do you think, now let's just focus on Fort Wayne, because we know what we can control. So where do you think we've made improvements, and where do you think that we need to do better?
I would say that we're having conversations, like we're
Okay.
talking about implicit
Okay.
bias. When I first started with the commission, there wasn't implicit bias training really. I mean,
Right.
our agency has always been involved in these types of trainings, but it wasn't something that was readily talked about.
Okay.
So
Okay,
we're
so
having these
We're
conversations
talking,
now.
okay, we're talking, but are we doing?
I believe that organizations and employers are starting.
So what are some of the things that you see or that you think that they are doing in terms of implementing or,
So because of what we do is we're investigating charges, a lot of times we don't get the inside look at exactly what they're doing, but with conversations on a personal level
Okay.
that I have with leaders in the community, they are wanting to start, making sure they're being intentional about recruitment so
Okay.
that they're recruiting individuals
Okay.
from different backgrounds. They're bringing that
Right.
diversity in. So they're asking those questions like, am I recruiting correctly? What does my executive team look like? Is it
Right.
diverse?
Right.
And so not only are they talking about it, they're asking those questions,
Okay.
and I think they're trying to be intentional
but
about
if we,
those
okay,
practices.
but if we look at those things, we can clearly say executive boards and executive managers are not diverse. We can clearly say that they are not practicing, having diversity and inclusivity in their hire. I mean, we can clearly look at these things. So how do we get beyond, so we're talking, but where's the doing? So how do we get past it? Because we can keep talking, and I think that's partly people's frustration, is that we just keep forming new committees and new education programs but is it how we're delivering the message not effective? Is it the message itself? Is it that maybe people really are very happy with, a lot of people think that the way they believe and how they live, and they think that's just fine. And
yeah, there's definitely room for improvement, no doubt about it, like what you're saying. And I think it really starts, if I was talking to an employer and they ask themselves that really tough question, like, yeah, what's my executive team look like? And they say, there isn't really diversity. Then it's taking, for them, I would tell them to take that personal assessment. Take a personal assessment of your organization and see where
Okay.
you specifically are having challenges and what you're doing well.
Okay.
Because I don't think every single organization has the same challenges
Absolutely.
or the same
Right.
successes. So it's really that employer taking a look
Okay.
at themselves and seeing where they can grow.
all right, but if we also look at, so within the context of Fort Wayne, it's not a very diverse community. Less than 15.7% of the population is African American, and it's even less for, it's only 4% for Hispanics.
Yep.
And so we're talking about, how do they do that when they say, well, it's who they hire, it's from the pool of what they have, and here are the people, or how do we work on that as a community?
Well, I think it's also making those partnerships. So like from a recruitment, kind of what you're alluding to is the recruitment piece is like, okay, and we get that a lot from employers. Well, we just don't have the pool of applicants. And so then we throw that question back to them is, well, where are you posting
Okay,
these positions?
right.
How are you recruiting? And where are you collaborating with organizations in the community? We have nonprofit organizations that work with the immigrant and refugee
Right.
population, who work with the Black Chamber of Commerce,
Right.
the Hispanic Chamber. Are you working with these different groups to be intentional about your hiring practices?
Okay.
And
So let's go on to some more of those. So what are some of the other things when you point out in your training, like the responses that you are getting? Because I don't think that everything needs to go back to saying that it's because of bias or, I mean, yes, perception is reality, but there is a difference between perception and bias. So when an employer, when you talk to them about these things and, they say, well, let's say about, discrimination or against, okay, so let's look at, and they say, well, it's not that they wouldn't want to hire a woman, like in construction, for instance, okay, that's a male-dominated field, or music engineering. So they're saying it's not like we wouldn't want to hire a woman, but there aren't women coming up in this field, let alone minorities. So what do you say to them? Do you then, what's your response to something like that?
I think it's kind of like what I just said with the recruitment practices, and really being intentional about those efforts of how they're doing things. Because if you always do what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got, right?
Right.
So learn, trying to really dig deep and see where they can maybe change how they're doing things.
And do you think also? I think that beyond just talking, because we are Indiana is very much it's not the protection and benefits are not for the employee. They're really designed for the employer. I mean, that's the nature of the state in which we live. So do you think that also it's not just enough to educate the lay people about that there may be these issues, but literally, what is the law? Like, I think that people don't understand because there is, I mean, the huge, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, that when you have to say to somebody, well, that is wrong and they shouldn't have done that, but they're not breaking the law. How do you, so, I mean, that to me, because it did happen to me with an issue, but is incredibly frustrating because all I keep saying is, but it's wrong. I mean, and so how do you, I mean, and you probably hear this more than anybody when you say to them, well, I understand you're upset, I understand you could, yes, but they didn't do anything that broke the law. So how do you deal with that? How do you respond to that? And then how do you do that to redirect how you educate and engage and inform the community, not the employers, so that we know what we can do and what our recourses are. But first we have to understand the law.
Right. So Indiana is an at-will state. So there are many reasons that an employer could terminate someone.
But mostly they can terminate you for any reason they want, right?
As long as it's not discriminatory.
Right.
So when we have people come in that are, thinking what you were saying, this is unfair, this wasn't justified, our role is to see, does this action fit within this legal framework that we're authorized to enforce?
Which is the laws.
Yeah, so that's
okay. So, but
we
that's
have a
not going to help.
specific.
Okay, but that's real, right?
Yeah,
It's very,
it's very
specific.
specific.
So in most cases, like I said, it may be wrong, and they may not have behaved in the best manner, but they didn't break the law.
Yeah.
So how do we? First of all, I think. Don't we need to better educate employees about what are the laws, like what you're entitled to? Like, for instance, your employee may say on your time card, for instance, so you get paid for 40 hours a week. So they just say, well, just fill it out for 40 instead of how many hours you really worked, even though you're only, because you're exempt, right? So is that legal? Is that not legal? Should I?
So you're talking about like the fair labor. We don't.
No, I know. But I'm just saying any of these things because you don't know what your rights are or what the law is. Like even though I'm paid as I'm using we won't use that one. But that's what I'm saying. Like how? Like I just feel like I'm not empowered to understand the law.
Yeah, and we do. We go out and do training for the citizens here in the community, specifically not just employers,
right?
Which we want to be a resource to employers and housing providers, but we also do training for citizens, and we make ourselves available so that they know what the law is.
So do you create it so that when I read the law, I mean, because I can understand it. And then also, do you also educate to help, like for somebody who has a disability, what are reasonable expectations and accommodations that you can expect? Because there is certain things that are grandfathered in based on before the ADA laws and stuff. So do you also educate like what's reasonable in terms of what you can expect, let's say your landlord to do?
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, we go out and do these trainings, and we specifically tell them kind of what the law is, and we give like scenarios and hypotheticals so that they are educated on, if this happened to me at my workplace, then I know like that flag is like, this isn't incorrect, and I've learned about this, and I should probably go to Metro, and this might be an issue that, you know, that has come up, that might be discrimination.
Right. And how about the fact that, especially in some of our minority communities, a lot of those landlords are absent landlords, and so they may be overseen by a property management company, or, so how do you deal with, in those instances? Is it then, does it fall to the responsibility of the property management company, or?
Yeah. So in fair housing cases, anyone that's involved with that housing could have a complaint filed against them. So that liability could fall on the housing provider or the property manager, the owner, could even fall on a leasing agent. So maintenance worker, they can all be named on a charge. So yeah, that liability could fall on them.
But you are finding that people are not using your services as a form of retribution or to be difficult to an, like, just like, you know, because you were terminated and you're mad, saying, well, I'm going to file, you know, because it is time and money, and then, you know, if there has to go through the process. So you're finding that people are, that the claims, and I mean, you have to investigate any claim, correct?
Yeah, so when someone comes to our office and we do that intake with them, once we've determined jurisdiction, then it's up to them to file. And so, like you said, this isn't like something that's filed today and resolved tomorrow. It does take time. It does take energy. While it is a free process, it's up to them to determine if they want to file it. And so, sometimes people come in and they choose not to file. They have
they just want to
jurisdiction.
vent. I mean, a lot of times people just want to vent.
And they have jurisdiction, or they're scared, right? They don't want to file because they don't want to be retaliated against.
Right.
But ultimately, it's going to be up to them what they want to do in that particular case.
And then you also addressed, since you've been the executive director, the time frame that it takes you from the time someone comes in to file a claim and the time that it is investigated and then goes through your process. You were trying to tighten that up.
Yeah, so our case age is usually, our goal is always for it to be around 180 days, and that's about 6 months. That might seem like a really long time, but if you were to file a case in federal court, so we're an administrative agency, and so if they have to come to us first anyway, but if you're to file in federal court after coming to us, you may be in federal court for 4 years, right? It just depends on the case. So yeah, our goal is to keep it within that time frame, so that, you know, we can get through that charge and make sure that we are getting a result.
And do I have to file a complaint with you before I would file it, like with the EEOC, or it does come to?
Yeah, if it's an employment case, you have to file with our agency. So you have to, what they call, exhaust your administrative remedies before you can file in federal court. And so, or you can get a right to sue. As long as it's been with us for 180 days, then you get a right to sue and you can go file in federal court.
And aren't there certain requirements, though, when you're looking at some issues with employers by the number of employees that they actually have? Or is that
For jurisdiction?
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. For the ordinance for employers, we need at least six employees. And for Title VII federal law, we need 15 employees.
And so, when was the last time that the city sort of took a look at all of these ordinances, or, you know, in terms of taking a look at, because of all of this awareness and bias and diversity, that our city government has really taken a look at these and really reevaluated, or maybe needed to make additions or changes, especially since maybe we have more diverse groups coming to Fort Wayne, or because of some of the issues that have come to light, like obviously with the relationships between the police and some minority groups, you know, in particular African Americans. How are they doing? And when was the last time that they've really taken a look at this and evaluated these?
Yeah.
Was it 2006? So it might have been the last year. I don't want to get the year wrong, but I think the last year they kind of revisited, and I think they added a basis.
2001, it was before I started. 2001, I believe, when sexual orientation was added as a protected class. So yeah, and I think that's the last time it's really been amended and updated. So.
And is there a requirement that they have to, like, do they have to look at the city ordinances when the federal law is changed, is that they are required then to see if they still comply? I mean, what is the process of getting these ordinances or new sort of ordinances on the books or get them to make new amendments? How does that work?
So generally, there's not a lot of changes to the ordinance, but if it came to be that a federal law changed and we felt like maybe our law wasn't substantially equivalent, then we as a commissioner, as an agency, would want to bring that to the attention of the city to say, hey, we want to create changes in our ordinance and come to the table with those changes.
And are we allowed to make, because sometimes, federal laws are very broad and they, don't really give you a clear definition by nature to be interpreted. Are there times that the city ordinances will go beyond that in terms of scope or adding more than what the federal law has them do? Or
yeah, there are times that can happen. With like Jenny said, in 2001, our city added sexual orientation, and that's not listed in the federal laws. So that was an example of where our law went a little bit further. Now I will say our ordinance made it so that it was only voluntary. So at that time, if you felt you were being discriminated against based on sexual orientation, you could file a charge. But there really wasn't no teeth, because if the respondent didn't want to proceed with the charge, then they could say, hey, we're not going to continue with this.
Right. But do you think that your process and the way that it works, do you think it has teeth?
Yeah, definitely.
For the person who's filing the claim, because ultimately they could get monetary or but does it have teeth to make a difference?
Yeah, I think our laws have enforcement power? That's what I would say. Absolutely. We investigate charges, and in that investigation, we may have to subpoena documentation or subpoena witnesses and talk to those individuals. And I will say most employers and the attorneys that we work with in town do a really great job of providing us everything that we need. And then if, once we've gotten the evidence and if the hearing officer says, yes, I believe this is probable cause, at that point, we do enforce. We take it to conciliation, and if it doesn't settle, we'll go to a public hearing. But I will say that most of our cases will settle at a conciliation, right? Which is similar to mediation,
right?
But it's just after a cause.
But isn't that partly it will settle because the employer doesn't necessarily want this to become public knowledge? Or
well, there's a lot of reasons why people would settle, but I mean, one reason is because they said, hey, we did something wrong and we want to rectify this. So they want to rectify it. But yeah, there could be interest for it to not go public as well. And there's cost litigation. There's a lot of reasons why.
Okay. But and at mediation, there is no admission of wrongdoing in a sense. So that's what I mean by teeth. Like, how do we? They know they did something wrong, so they could say, okay, I'm sorry, but that doesn't stop them from doing it again. I mean, how do we get it more than just, slap on the wrist, or what can we do?
Well, I don't know. Wouldn't say that it doesn't, when you say it doesn't stop them from doing it again, I think that when we enforce and even when we get settlements, that it does stop people from doing it again, because now they're going to think, okay, maybe they didn't know, because there's sometimes where it's not something not everything's really egregious.
Well, that's why I was asking you about intent, because, a lot of times they could say, I just didn't know that's wrong.
Yeah, right? So they didn't know that a reasonable accommodation in housing was they had to change the date when rent was due when someone receives disability, when they request that, right? Maybe they didn't know that. But, so yeah, I do believe that it does work in the sense that once, even if it's a settlement and it's gone cause, and they see what's happened, I think it does make them aware to hopefully make better decisions later. And the settlements, the policy changes, the public interest relief,
right?
That we put that in there.
But it sounds to me that from this conversation, and tell me if I'm wrong, that it sounds to me that Fort Wayne is doing well, but sometimes based on some of what you see, or some of the issues and stuff that you would think. Or like that we were in such a dire situation that we needed, this united front. And but it sounds to me that from your work, and you're the boots on the ground, that we're doing pretty well in these areas. Am I wrong, or?
No, I would say that discrimination does happen, and it's happening here in the city. And when I think of United Front, specifically that program, I feel like they're trying to be proactive as well, so that a similar issue like
Right, but
George
I felt
Floyd
like,
or
right, but I
any
felt
of those
like,
issues
but I
don't
felt like
happen.
it came out of a response to we are in a state of crisis and that we really have gotten this wrong. And we may get it wrong I'm not judging what the country does. I'm
Yeah.
looking at what Fort Wayne, that's what I felt like. We really looked at this and said, we are in a crisis as a city and we have to look, because we are perpetuating these biases and discrimination and institutional racism. But what I see is, yes, education and constantly engaging and constantly reforming, and it takes people 14 times to see something before they get it, is very important. But it sounds to me, from listening to you and how you work and how the government's working with you and, people are trying, that we're not as bad off, or that we're doing much better than probably a lot of people would think. Am I wrong? Or now, that's not to say there's always work to be done, but I would not say that we are in such this state of crisis here.
I think it depends on the issues that
Okay.
you're talking about.
Okay.
Because when we're in a pandemic right now, and so nationwide and even locally, we have seen some issues with like sexual harassment.
Right.
Or,
And we're going to see more issues with eviction because, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
but those are also partly that the eviction issue is a bigger one. But
so there are some issues where there are
Okay.
crises, right? Like
Okay.
the eviction
Right.
crisis.
That's okay.
Fort Wayne being 13th in the country for that.
seventh, I thought we were.
No,
13th now.
Yep.
Okay, so we're gotten better because we used to be 7th.
Really?
In the number of evictions, yeah.
Okay.
So but in overall, like, I would not say that. I mean, really, what I feel is like everybody's on this heightened alert that we were going down the drain. I mean, if we didn't save ourselves, that was it, because that's what I felt. Like, but this is what I mean when I look at boots on the ground and you're telling me the types of cases and where, it doesn't seem as, yes, I'm not saying that it's not that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that we are not like, it's not the Titanic, and that we're just moving the deck chairs on, the deck. And that it's a sinking, that's what I'm saying. That we really are, we're like we may be a cruise ship that's sort of off course or something, but we're not, it's not this heightened, like Titanic in a sense. Am I wrong?
I wouldn't say we're Titanic.
Yeah. I would say a lot of it's probably based on perspective. So if you've had steady employment and, consistent, reliable housing, things might seem pretty good, right? But if you go to apply for a job and you keep getting turned down, but you feel like you're qualified and don't know why, so I think for certain people in the community,
I'm not saying that it's not happening, but it's not to this degree that we are just so insensitive and so, like, that we really need, like, that our sensibilities when it comes to civil rights and equal rights, and that we're not, the city's doing okay. I mean, yes, there's always room for improvement, but we're not in the state of, like, do you agree with me? Because, I mean, you're doing this every day.
So I never like to, like, speak broadly as to what, because when we get the cases that we get, we can see that there are issues, right?
No,
that there are
there's always
issues
going to
for
be
sure.
issues, but what I'm saying is you're not seeing, like I asked you, the number of cases. I mean, you're not all, 300, and you had 354 complaints for employment in 2019, and you had 67 cases investigated for housing. I would not say that is a institutional systemic crisis. I mean, if you saw that you were getting 1,500 to 2,000 based, I would say, oh boy, we have something. But I'm not saying there aren't problems. I just wonder if we are just sort of blowing it. I'm not blowing it up. I don't know what the term is, but I just feel like we're on the Titanic when we're not. We're doing better than we were. We're okay. We have lots to go and lots to do, but we're not. Not everybody needs to worry so much that they're not aware of their biases, or they're not being sensitive, or they're not being inclusive. That's what I'm saying, that we have it in our culture that we're doing okay. So yes, there's still problems, but I wouldn't say it's this overarching crisis that I just feel is what I just feel it's like this weighted element on top of everything else that I just feel is weighted and throwing a blanket over the community instead of maybe it should be a sheet, for the weight of it. I'm not saying that it's not important, but I just can't, based on what you're telling me and how good and how receptive and what's happening in these number of cases, I can't say to look based on facts, and you are, like I said, boots on the ground, you are those frontline people, that it's bad, but it's not as bad relative to other areas and things.
And see, it's hard for me to compare, you know,
Okay.
'cause I don't know what exactly is happening in other cities
Okay.
Yeah.
in comparison to what's happening in
But
our
do you
city.
understand my point? I mean, am I off in my sense of, or I don't know, because you're on the boots every day. So I'm just wondering if, I mean, it's a problem,
I
right?
think it's an individual call for people to look at themselves and see, you know, when we talk about implicit bias and all those things, implicit bias and understanding diversity
Right.
is important. I think each of us really needs to always do a
Yes,
self-assessment.
but I think that's the difference, though, is looking at us as individuals versus putting us all together as this collective group, and we're all bad and doing.
Yeah, no, I don't
yeah,
think, I
sure.
agree that we should
Okay.
not do that.
So at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask the guests the same 12 questions that were popularized by Marcel Proust in a Victorian parlor game. And they're supposed to reveal more about your true nature. What is your favorite word?
Honesty.
What is your favorite word?
My favorite word, love,
What is your least favorite word?
hate.
Yeah, I would say hate as well. Yeah.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Being outside.
Being with family.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Oh, what turns me off? Lack of acceptance.
Negativity.
What sound or noise do you love?
The sound of my children.
I would say laughing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Probably like screaming.
Yeah, screaming. Yeah.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Probably not journalism. I don't think that's.
I hope that's not a reflection of this, but okay. But you're a lawyer. Journalism and legal,
Kind of
there's
goes
a lot of
yeah.
similarities there.
I would say, you know, I love the nonprofit work and, you know, being an advocate on that side too. So if I switched gears, maybe going that route.
And what would you not like to do?
Probably business law, remember I said?
That's right.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
say the same.
All right.
Business.
That
I
corporate-
Really,
Okay, we got that
really
one.
wanna
What do you
stay,
consider your
yeah.
greatest achievement?
Besides my family, just what I do every day, being in public service, I'm really, really grateful for that.
Yeah, I would say, again, like she said, besides family, and even, you know, I like what we do, but also for me would be kind of crossing those boundaries and being like the first in my family to get an undergraduate degree as well as to go to law school. So the only lawyer in my family right now.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Ooh. Say Jesus.
My first thought's always Abraham Lincoln.
How would you like to die?
My gosh.
wow.
Oh man. Hopefully peacefully.
How would I like to die? In my sleep.
Okay. And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome, my good and faithful servant.
I agree. Same.
Well, thank you. And I think that you have given us some more of a hopeful view of how we're doing as a city in these very heated and weighted topics and times that we're in. So
Thank you for having us.
I think you've given us a positive outlook to it. Learn more about And Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at andgoodcompany.info. We look forward to next week when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.